you've heard it now, recording in progress. And we will also later in the Q&A enable you to participate in the webinar in a more interactive way. When we discuss in the panel later, you can put your questions in the Q&A, and then we will promote you as speakers, so you can ask your questions live in case you want to. Short overview of what we will be doing now. We will have a short introduction by the Integrate Network Chair, Georg Frank. In a minute, then we will have a keynote speech by Markus Lindner. Then we will have a panel discussion with very inspiring panelists. And we will try to close the webinar at 5:30. If the discussions are still quite heated, we can make it a little bit longer, but we try to keep the time. And now I'm happy to hand over to my colleague Georg Frank, who is the current Integrate Network Chair, for some welcoming words.
Good afternoon, everybody. As the current chair of the Integrate Network, I would like to welcome all participants to today's webinar. And first of all, for those who are not so familiar with the aims and the working methods of Integrate, I would like to introduce Integrate a little bit. So Integrate was established formally in 2016 on the special initiative of the Czech Republic and Germany. We are currently 16 member countries and a certain number of observer countries, which are organized via so-called focal points in the countries. So the participating countries finance Integrate via a multi-donor trust fund. And the secretariat is operated by the European Forest Institute. So what is the main aim of Integrate? Very briefly. So we promote integrative biodiversity conservation and the maintenance of other ecosystem services in managed forests under the conditions of climate change and the associated challenges and impacts. The basic idea is not just to concentrate the conservation of biodiversity segregatively on protected areas, but to promote it within normal forest management through mostly simple and cost-effective measures or even omissions. For this, we see ourselves as an open, proactive interface at the triangle of research, policy, and practice. We facilitate the exchange of successful management practices among members and beyond, and we maintain a network of more than 230 demonstration sites, so-called martelloscopes, in more than 20 European countries. And we provide a platform in events and excursions to discuss on balancing demands of nature conservation and other forest functions and services. And today's webinar is one of such forums, with a special focus on the relationship between biodiversity and resilience of forests. This webinar was organized in cooperation with Transformit. I would also like to welcome the participants of this Horizon Europe funded project. Transformit stands for Transforming Forest Management for Multiple Ecosystem Services and Nature Conservation via the integrative approach. So we expect synergy effects from this, and I think we made it the same in the Integrate initiative and in the Transformit project. I also welcome a large number of ProSilva members from all European countries, among them the new president of ProSilva, Thomas Ruska, from the Czech Republic, and other board members. Generally, I am particularly pleased about the high number of participants from all European countries and beyond. I've even seen some members from USA or some participants from USA. Last but not least, I would also like to extend a very warm welcome to the representatives of the European Commission. And with that, I would like to hand back to our moderator, Gesche Schifferdecker. Thank you, Gesche.
Thank you very much, Georg, for this very nice introduction, also for sharing some information on Transformit. I will put the link to the website later in the chat. Now it is my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Dr. Markus Lindner. He's working with me in EFI, and he's the head of resilience program at European Forest Institute. He has more than 30 years of experience in research on climate change impacts and also the development of response strategies in forest management. She's also working, or he has been working on forest sector sustainability assessment and biodiversity conservation in European forests. And he has been involved in more than 40 projects, actually, European projects as a coordinator or partner. And currently he is coordinating the Horizon 2020 project Resonate, which is working on resilient forest value chains in Europe. And I have the pleasure of working in that project with him. So I'm curious to hear about some of your reflections based on the Resonate results. And the floor is yours, Markus.
Thank you very much. I hope I managed to share my screen. It's already now full screen mode, right?
Yes, it is.
Just trying to get rid of the box here. So, all right. Okay, so good afternoon. It's a pleasure to provide this keynote here. I was asked to introduce the concept of forest resilience, what it is, and how we can actually enhance resilience in our forest management using also the biodiversity aspects. And I will start my presentation with trying to explain what I understand under resilience. And it's actually not that, well, it should be also moving here. There are many different definitions around, and resilience has been established partly from this perspective on ecological resilience by Holling in 1973. And this is one of the most cited references to what resilience means. It's the system's capacity to absorb disturbance without changing, as well as the ability to self-organize and build adaptive capacity. This is rather heavy theoretical stuff, and I try to a little bit go to more simple terms first to explain some basics. I will actually then present also some alternative definitions of what resilience or forest resilience also mean. But let me first step a bit outside of the forest by using some analogies of this kid here boxing a punching ball. This punching ball is obviously designed to absorb a disturbance. And when the kid is pushing the punching ball, it will move a bit, but then it will actually return to the initial state where it started. So we can look at this as an effect on a system, and then the system will actually return to its initial state. And I would like to use this analog now to compare two different concepts, which are often actually used as synonyms, but they're actually not. So resilience is applied in many different contexts, societal resilience, even in psychology, for example. And then there's also this term of resistance. And very often these things are completely used exchangeably. But I try to make this example here by showing that if this kid now would actually punch a much bigger adult's punching ball, the effect of his boxing push will be much smaller, and then the system again will also then return to its initial state. And we can say that both of these punching bags are completely resilient systems. They are designed to absorb disturbance, and they will then return to this initial state. But resilience is not the same, as you can actually see that both of these systems I describe as resilient. However, the bigger punching ball here has much higher resistance than the smaller one. So it will take more effort to push it out of the balance, and it will also return more quickly into the initial state compared to the smaller one that is bouncing maybe more widely. So now let us imagine how we can then actually measure something like resilience. Very often this was actually done in relation to disturbance impacts which are affecting natural systems. So this concept of engineering resilience, which describes the time that it takes for variables to return towards their equilibrium following a disturbance, that's a very typical application that has been used quite a lot and investigated by many researchers, where they actually looked at the disturbance effects on a tree or a forest, and then they measure what was the situation before the disturbance and what is the situation after the disturbance. So for this, quite some time ago, Paco-Loré in 2011 proposed a methodology which was here now adapted by Hans Pretjen co-authors to analyze the resistance and resilience of European tree species to drought stress. And I quite like this schematic way how they describe a disturbance impact on growth, and then they compare how the tree was growing before the disturbance and how the tree is growing after the disturbance. And resilience is actually the post-disturbance growth relative to the pre-disturbance growth. And you see here two different trees. On the left, this tree is less affected by the drought than the tree on the right. And this decrease in growth here with the disturbance, that's actually the measure of resistance. So this tree is less resistant, but it also does recover partly after the disturbance to a level of growth which is higher than during the drought, but it's a measure of resilience, like how well it actually recovers after the disturbance effect to then quantify the systems, or in this case, the tree's resilience. So let's now take this approach and look at forest stands. And we see on the left here in the A panel, 3 different pure stands. We have a Norway spruce stand, an European beech stand, and a sessile oak stand. And you see all of these are having a certain level of growth, which is set as 1 before the drought of the year 1976. 1976 was a very pronounced drought year in Central Europe. And this study has now analyzed how the trees, the stands actually also reacted to this drought event and how it recovered afterwards. And interestingly, you see that the tree species, spruce, beech, and oak, responded very differently. They decreased to different levels, and actually spruce was the least resistant. It was dropping its growth most severely in the drought year, but then actually it responded and recovered to this even better than the other species. So it was shown as a very resilient species after suffering from this drought. And also very interesting is that you can apply the same methodology then to also not only compare the pure stands of spruce, beech, and oak, but also how a mixed stand would react. And let's look at the C panel here on the right. We see that there were pure stands of beech and oak, and then we actually compare how the mixed stand of a mixture of beech and oak reacted here in comparison to those pure stands. And actually we find that the resistance of the mixed stand was actually higher, so it decreased less in the drought year, and it actually recovered the best compared to the pure stands of beech and oak. So we can see that the system is able to respond to a disturbance, and we can use the mixture effect here to actually facilitate a better response of the ecosystem as compared to individual stands would have. So now let us take a second look at this initial definition of ecological resilience. very often this is analyzed in a way that we are understanding that our natural system is a kind of a basin of attraction, which is then sometimes affected by a disturbance, and then a disturbance may push the system state out of this basin of attraction. And then the question is, does the forest system, the ecosystem, respond in a way that it's actually then going back into a similar situation as when it started? For example, in the past, we would have looked at windfall effects on forests, and then after a windfall, you actually have a very changed forest composition. But a few decades later, the system develops in a very similar situation as before. So you could actually have a complete recovery to the same equilibrium state. But if you then have changes in the system, like for example, climate change, affecting the viability of different species, you might no longer be able to actually recover to the same direction. You might actually need to have a system evolving in terms of changing composition to then continue providing the previous services, but in a different forest type than what you had before. So this is the an example of the ecological resilience, how the system actually adapted to the change from the climate and then actually self-organized in a different way to then fulfill its initial services and functions. As there are so many different terms and definitions of forest resilience, this is always a bit confusing to practitioners, to everybody actually. And that's why a few years ago, we have compiled an expert panel to analyze how we can actually interpret these differences in the forest resilience concepts. And Laura Nikimor was leading this process as part of her PhD work. And her study was then resulting in the conclusion that these are different types of perspectives on forest resilience, but they are actually not conflicting each other. They are simply different foci of a same system, which has a different degree of complexity. So when I started to describe the tree response to a disturbance in terms of engineering resilience, that's just one type of system which is affected by a particular disturbance, where the tree is recovering after the disturbance to continue growing as before, more or less. In the ecological resilience, you're able to consider also changing environmental conditions. But then the third concept that I believe is the most relevant nowadays is the concept of social ecological resilience. And here, the first part is more or less the same as the ecological part, but then you add one sentence in the end here. It describes the degree to which the system is capable of self-organizing, learning, and adapting. And this brings in the human dimension to the social ecological resilience. So you see here that we are not only having the ecological system, which is also part of the social ecological resilience, but you're also having a certain anthropogenic structure that depends on the resources from the ecological system, and it has the humans who are planning how to manage the system and also are able to recognize if there's a change in the environmental conditions, which then requires a change in the management regime. So if you want to enhance your resilience of the forest system, you need to actively partly also change your management to then react to the ongoing changes. And that's exactly the topic that we are investigating in our Resonate project, and Gersche has already kindly introduced it in the beginning. I'm very happy to coordinate this project as a joint exercise with 20 partners. And Resonate aims to generate the needed knowledge and practices for making European forests, the services they provide, and related economic activities more resilient to future climate change and disturbances. And by the way, we are not only looking at climate change and disturbance, but also changes in societal demands and expectations to forests. And as I already now tried to elaborate, is that we should not only look at forest and forest management, but we need to look at also how we are using our forest, what kind of value chain we are operating, and how our society is actually depending on the services the forests provide. And that's why we need to look at different ways of enhancing resilience, not only in management, but also inside the forest value chain. And that's what I try to elaborate a little bit further now in the remaining part of my presentation. To do that, our colleagues from CREAF in the Resonate project have developed an operational resilience assessment framework, what they call ORF. It's not to confuse with the Austrian broadcasting company, but it is proposing a common assessment framework that can be applied to study the enhancing resilience in different parts of the forest and the forest value chain. And this depends on a number of steps. We first have to clarify like which understanding of resilience are you investigating here? What is the forest ecosystem you're studying? What kind of characteristics you're interested in? Resilience to what? If you are studying resilience to disturbances, this is different from, for example, resilience to a change in climate or the societal changes. And resilience of what? You have to specify what are the target variables you're going to analyze in your system. And then you need to also have an idea of how you can measure the changes. So you need to have metrics that you can use to observe your system variables. Some of these variables are actually things that you cannot change. So these are what we call co-drivers of resilience. So the co-drivers are the ones that you cannot manage, but the resilience predictors, these are the types of system variables that are subject to changes in management. So you can, for example, increase the diversity of tree species in your forest stand. That is a resilience predictor compared to some other variables which you can't really affect with your management. And lastly, you also need to clarify if you are changing your management, how do you compare the effects of your change management compared to what reference status? So you have to really always be very clear what to compare with what. So these are, I think, in the first glimpse, maybe quite confusing and complex questions, but actually it is very helpful to lead you through this step-by-step process of operationally adopting this concept of resilience and finding out how your management changes can affect forest resilience. In their work, the group has also reviewed the literature on forest resilience, and they identified a large number of indicators that were used to assess resilience. And then they also looked at how important the stakeholders perceive the different indicators. And then, and this is a little bit too detailed to explain in very specific details, they also looked at how the different indicators connect to different aspects of resilience. And they found that biodiversity was really a central player in the network of interactions underlying the forest resilience concepts. And many things relate to biodiversity and diversity at other levels, how that actually influences your system's ability to provide resilient services for the future. So that's a very nice finding that we had in this project, showing that the topic we are discussing today is really absolutely relevant. The next part of our Resonate project then looked at investigating how we can change management, how silvicultural adaptation measures such as thinning, enhancing species, and structural diversity, how they can enhance resilience and prevent disturbance impacts. This is work that Julius Willig is doing in his PhD at the University of Freiburg. And in his work, one of the key findings was that among the measures that he investigated, it was the thinning, so reducing density, which has the strongest evidence in how it can actually increase survival and mitigate drought effects. So you see that there's a lot of studies that he found, from local studies to cross-regional comparison studies and meta-analysis, which show dominantly that there's, or the majority of studies did find positive effects of this thinning on enhancing resilience. I said already before that biodiversity was also seen as very, very fundamental for the enhancing resilience. This was investigated in Resonate also with a modeling study by Julien Barrea et al. And they investigated how forest storm resilience depends on the interplay between functional composition and climate. And they could show that species-rich assemblages had higher recovery and resilience to storm disturbance, and that functional diversity improved the resistance and recovery of the stands. Interestingly, they also found that just as a general way of increasing diversity, this was effective mostly in the climate margins of the distribution range of species, but not so much in the center. In the center of the forest type distribution, it was more important whether the types of trees which were favored, if they were slow growing or fast growing. So the gradient between slow growing and fast growing species was more important than diversity per se. So it was actually more effective to have a mixed forest with an important share of slow growing species. This improved the storm resilience more than any other diverse forest composition. And then Jules Willig, coming back to his work, he also looked at the evidence base in the literature about the mixed species effects on drought response. And the response here he found was much more mixed, so not as uniformly positive. But we also then did some stakeholder surveys to collect more insights from practitioners also. And overall, we did find a predominantly positive effect of tree diversity on resistance to disturbances, namely to drought, insects, mammal herbivory, and wind, but not regarding fire. But I have to stress again here that the effects were not universal, and they strongly depend on the species identity in the mixture. So what type of species was mixed, as I already alluded before, but also the type of disturbance and the local site conditions and climate. So the beneficial effects of mixture are much more site and context dependent, and it's important to understand what kind of site conditions you have and what kind of disturbance you try to mitigate. Another important way of enhancing forest resilience through your management is to look at your tree species composition and the suitability of your tree species for the changing climate. So resilient forests need tree species that are climate adapted, well climate adapted. That means that they can tolerate the existing but also the expected future climate. And this was documented quite nicely in a recent study published by Vesely et al. In Nature, Ecology and Evolution, where they projected a bottleneck of climate-adapted tree species for forest management in Europe. We are here somewhere in the 2020s, and our current portfolio of tree species is on average about 12 to 15 species per cell across Europe. And what they found was that when you look into the future, there's more and more species that are no longer climatically adapted to the future climate. They also find some species which are newly adapted to the future climate, but you of course need to have a species composition with trees which are able to survive today, but also in the future. And this then in their study led to this problem that you actually have a real bottleneck that you actually have a decreasing number of species that are available for forest management across the whole century. There's, of course, still large uncertainties remaining. This graph here illustrates the response under medium climate change. When they looked at the more severe climate change, it was even more drastic. But we also don't always know exactly like how our species will react to the future climate. And therefore, we have to understand that we will need to learn more on how our different species adapt to climate change. But the topic of needing well climate adapted species is of course something that is relevant and important all across Europe. So now let me still say a few words about aspects which are going beyond forest management. I talked so far mostly about this part of the forest management cycle where we actually have response options, innovation pathways that were identified here with stakeholder surveys. Altogether, we had found 9 innovation pathways in Resonate in this part of the work. And it was interesting that there were more innovation pathways for forest management than for the processing industries. But we also looked at the options here in the forest value chain and on the societal demand side. And an interesting finding here was that while on the forest management side, the focus is very much on diversification. So stressing biodiversity, but also diversification of management regimes, forest types and landscape level and so on. In contrary to that, in the processing industry, the focus is much more on efficiency, like optimizing efficiency and not diversification. And that leads to potential trade-offs because if you diversify your forest and you have different types of assortments coming out, this does not really fit very well to a processing industry that is optimized under efficiency considerations. So this is something that needs to be then recognized and managed in the future in a better way. Finally, we also looked at the resilience to societal demand changes. And here, our colleagues have developed this so-called demand resilience ladder. And you see here that on the upper part of the ladder, these are the services which are most easy to be actually replaced. And they found that forest recreation and carbon sequestration appeared to be the most resilient ecosystem services because you could, for example, if there would be no forest recreation possible anymore, you could go into the gym or some other place to actually move your recreation indoors. But they also found that timber production and non-wood forest products were assessed to be resilient due to the number of and quality of other substitutes. So you could actually replace them also with other products, even though you would of course have obvious trade-offs with that. The least easy to replace services were the protective functions. So while you can move your recreational use indoors, you can't easily replace the protective functions of the forest ecosystem. So that's what we have to keep in mind, that some things you can actually, as a society, change, but the service that the forest and the ecosystems are providing in situ, you can't really actually replace very easily. So that's now the end of my talk. I can try to wrap up now. So I try to explain different ways of characterizing forest resilience in my presentation, and I also introduce different ways of management practices that actually allow to enhance resilience. And in response to climate change and increasing disturbance intensities, it is important to enhance forest resilience, not only in forest management, but also in the forest value chain. Biodiversity and diversity at different levels is crucial for enhancing forest resilience. And stakeholders generally actually advocated to address resilience challenges by increasing the share of mixed species and by also increasing the share of uneven-aged forests. Conversion towards climate-adapted mixed species stands is a general recommendation that applies across whole of Europe. However, you should consider that many other response measures, like how to mitigate disturbances and what kind of species mixtures to select, these are considerations that are much more locally different, and you need to really always take into account very much the context to select the right measures for your local and regional conditions. Increasing the share of mixed species forests may impose a mismatch between forest raw material supply and markets, since most of the forest-based production is based on softwood. So this is something that you also have to manage when you try to optimize and make your value chain and processing industries more resilient. We have made quite some progress in operationalizing the assessment of forest resilience, and now I think it's about time to take these concepts and really test them in the practice. And I'm very much looking forward to the panel discussion, also to hear how the practitioners actually react to our proposals here. This is now my second last slide. I would like to thank my project collaborators here. This is our very stimulating Resonate project team in a recent project meeting in Croatia. And we are still having a few months left with the project, wrapping up by end of March next year. And here are some more web pages and sources you can follow to follow the interesting outcomes of our project. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for possible questions. Gesche, you are muted.
Thank you very much, Markus, for this. It happens again, even though we've done like 1 million webinars. Yeah, thank you for this inspiring presentation, including a lot of results from Resonate research. And considering the participants of this webinar, and now there are also some participants from the industry. So I think this was also probably inspiring for them, but also many forest owners, forest managers, and researchers, of course, and also policymakers. I've already received more than 5 emails for people who are interested in getting your presentation. So yeah, we can talk about that later. Before we start with the panel discussion, I would like to still add some questions for you, maximum, actually some, I say 2. There are different really good questions in the Q&A. I'm afraid we cannot address them all, but I've selected actually 2 for you, and then the others we might be able to pick up in the panel discussion. So the first question is coming from Catherine McSweeney from the European Investment Bank. And she's asking about the relationship between biodiversity of non-tree species or / animals and forest resilience, because there has been a study recently by Max Planck Institute, for instance, that shows animals are crucial for tree regeneration and restoration. And the question is whether this is also something we can talk about from the Resonate perspective, or you can talk about from your experience.
This goes a little bit beyond what we can study from Resonate, because we have been really focusing on the managed forest here. But this is, of course, the strong link between diversity, biodiversity at different levels with the functional ecosystem services and the functional ecosystem, because you need basic requirements to actually have a very resilient system. And then also the regeneration is, of course, requiring many different characteristics in the soil, in the fauna, in different levels. So yeah, it would require another presentation to actually dive into all these functional aspects. But I stressed in my presentation already that it's diversity at different levels, which is really important. And very often we only look at the tree diversity, but of course there's much more behind that, and much more we can also make use of if we are understanding how our diverse and resilient systems can help us securing ecosystem functioning for the future.
I think we need another webinar maybe on that topic. Another question comes from an anonymous participant who is asking how we can adapt existing trees to a climate that may produce severe droughts in one year, and then, of course, for instance, floods in another year.
So the existing trees have very limited ability to adapt. The forest can adapt, of course. So then the question is, most interesting is the question, like, can our existing species actually adapt? And we know that they are diverse also in genetic composition. And there's examples of, for example, beech stand, where in the wake of the drought years, you saw that some big trees have died, but some other beech trees did not have mortality effects. So then you could also even show that there's genetic differences in the existing trees. And of course, with time, then also the system will naturally adapt. And I think this question of natural adaptive capacity is one of the big question marks. This is important, and we know that there is certain ability to adapt, but how much, that is really the big question mark. And it will be very, very crucial to get a better understanding of this, to what extent, for example, a species can adapt genetically to a changing and more dry environment. But very often the natural adaptive capacity is smaller than what we would actually need. And I'm convinced that we need to also support the adaptation needs with active adaptation measures. For example, introducing more southern provenances of a species, which are then more drought tolerant based on our experimental knowledge, or even add additional species into our mixed stands, which are then including also species that are currently not at the site. Because if we would just let the natural regeneration take place after, for example, a spruce dieback, then you would probably lead back to a spruce stand that is not resilient, and you may want to really ensure that your future managed stand includes also species that are productive under the changing climate.
Thank you very much, Markus. With this answer, you've also answered two more questions in the chat. One was related to assisted migration or introducing new tree species. The other one was referring to different provenances of given tree species. So thank you very much for that. Now I would like to introduce my panelists for today, the panelists that we will have in addition to Markus Lindner. And I'm starting with Olive Levy. Olive is a forest owner from the Midlands of Ireland. Can you please, yes, perfect, add Olive and then also still keep Markus. Olive is a forest owner from Ireland, and she's committed to the promotion of farm forestry and also sustainable forest management through what we call continuous cover forestry. And she's also the national coordinator at the Irish Forest Owners, which is an umbrella organization representing forest owner groups across Ireland. And she's also an administrator for ProSilva Ireland, advancing continuous cover forestry practice in Ireland. She holds a PhD in immunology from Trinity College Dublin. Welcome, Olive. My next panelist is Serena Buscarini. She holds a degree in sustainable management of mountain areas from the Free University of Bolzano, and she is licensed as a forester and working at Dream Italia. I really love the name of this company. It makes me happy again and again, where she is technically managing the life project GoPro for Med. She has also worked on the implementation of some of the Italian martelloscopes. Those have been mentioned already by Georg, following the Integrate Plus methodology. And she has also taught in the Expert in Forest Management for the Conservation of Biodiversity course, which was offered by Live GoPro 4 by this project. And we've already collaborated a lot in this project. So it was, yeah, maybe we can share the link to the website also in the chat. And then my fourth panelist is Juraj Diaci. Dr. Juraj Diaci is the head of the chair of silviculture at the biotechnical faculty, the Department of Forestry at the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. And he is also chairing the board of Paharnik Charity, which is managing more than 600 hectares of forests. He studied forestry in Slovenia and also in Zurich in Switzerland, where he did his PhD on the regeneration ecology of forests. During his employment in mountain region of Nazarie in the Sardinia Alps, he gained practical experience. So he's a researcher and has also this practical perspective on silviculture. And he was also in charge, a little bit like Marcus, more than 20 different national and international research projects. And one of them is called Beer and the other one is Netman. So I'm kind of all the time thinking about Batman. But now we want to go into the topics of the panel. And I would like to start with, I have some like dedicated questions to the panelists, but I would like to start with a more general question, which is, we've heard a lot about resilience and different concepts of resilience, and the resilience concept that Resonate has been elaborating on. But looking at it from the practical perspective, what does the integrative approach actually do to increase the resilience of forest ecosystems? And I also thank you, Marcus, for stressing the ecosystem and not just the single trees, because we have to look at the ecosystem compared to more conventional forest management approaches. And I would like to start maybe with Serena.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I guess thank you, Marcus, for the explanation actually for about the resilience and how that works. And I think that is a perfect start to explain actually how integrating biodiversity into forest management actually helps to reach more resilient forests. I think, as Marcus explained, that integrating biodiversity leads actually to have more stable forests. For example, by integrating biodiversity, we mean, for example, leaving some elements into the forest which are actually essential for species living in the forest, which allow to increase soil fertility, for example, which is at the base if we want to have stable and healthy forests. So it's also related to the question that it was done before from one participant. We could say that also non-tree species are fundamental. If we think about one criteria or one key factor of biodiversity conservation is, for example, leaving deadwood inside the forest. And if we just think that more than 30% of the forest species, animal forest species and and plant species depend on deadwood, we can make an idea of how much important it is to have also different kind of species, which are not just plant species, but also, for example, insects, which make actually the ecological system really work. So we have some criteria that we can use in forest management to consider all these factors. Other criteria which are arising and which are more and more used in forest management now is about the microhabitats. So microhabitats also are elements that we can consider in forest management, and it's becoming very important to pay attention to them, to release them, and to release them for the species who live in the forest. So I think there are different kind of criteria that we can consider and that now are becoming more and more known, and it is becoming very clear that we have to start to consider them and to integrate them into forest management.
Thank you very much, Serena. What is your perspective, Olive, from the kind of work with continuous cover forestry?
Hi, thank you very much. And I just want to say, Marcus, that talk was incredible. I have so many questions for you, but I will try and answer this. So like Serena is trained in forestry. I'm not at all. I'm a forest owner. My parents planted our forest 25 years ago. So it's very young, but that's very much reflection of, I suppose, the forest estate we have in Ireland. But I kind of, my reason for kind of looking at continuous cover forestry was ash dieback. So ash is kind of one of our most commercial native species here in Ireland. And like across Europe, ash dieback came into the country. We had planted a portion of our forest in ash, and the trees all got diseased. And I was just standing looking at all these sick trees going, what is going to happen to the rest of the trees here? You know, because we just have like a block of Norway spruce. Now it's mixed compared to other forests, but it's still, I felt it was very vulnerable. So that was my motivation of kind of looking at managing it in a way that I will have a forest into the future that I can then pass on. I'm also very interested in developing other aspects and other sources of income, not just timber out of it. And unless I have a resilient forest, I can't develop anything from it. So as an owner's point of view, that was very much my motivation. Was I have this asset that has been passed down. My parents made the decision to change the land use from agriculture to forestry. I feel that, you know, I'm a custodian of that now, and then to pass that on, I want to leave it in a better way than it was, than, you know, that I've got it. And so what can I do to make this more resilient? So that was kind of my motivation. So we've started underplanting to kind of increase the species diversity. After thinning operations, I spend a lot of time up there. Any kind of regeneration that's coming, I kind of try and protect and favor that anywhere that's bringing in new species in particular. But it's still, I'm very early on this journey. So with regards to kind of, you know, how can I do it? I don't actually know. We're experimenting, we're trying things. But, you know, I suppose behind it all, I do want to have a functioning forest that delivers, you know, on lots of different aspects that a forest can, and that it is economically viable. So they'd be kind of my kind of key priorities. And I think for most owners who manage their forests in you know, under these principles, that is their motivation. It's you know, economic viability, biodiversity, and social.
Thank you very much, Olive, also for sharing your perspective as a forest owner, where, of course, the economic viability plays an important role. And you are managing your forest. I would like to ask Juraj, also with reference to the question, what kind of how the integrative approach differs from conventional approaches. I would like to also add some of your knowledge from your research you did on primary forests, because there are, and Marcus has also mentioned it, that some forests better adapt. And what can we learn actually from primary forests about the resilience of forest ecosystems to climate change impacts and also other environmental influences, and how does that link to integrated forest management? How can integrated forest management be inspired by that?
Thank you for this question. I can say that in general, for temperate European old-growth forest ecosystem, both the resistance of system to natural disturbance or their recovery after disturbance is in a way better compared to managed forest. but it also depends on the type of disturbance. For example, resistance is relatively low to anthropogenic disturbance. So we have problems with, for example, forest dieback in 80s because of the sulfur emissions. And we have still ongoing chronic disturbance because of the overbrowsing. We have too high levels of ungulates. So this is more kind of anthropogenic disturbance. We have to be very careful with this one. But on the other hand, regarding climate, it's old-growth forests, they are very good regarding microclimatic regulation. There is very high growing stock usually, and we don't have so many large-scale disturbances in Central Europe. So these ecosystems are driven by intermediate or small-scale disturbances. And I remember year 2003, we made kind of comparative measurements in old-growth forests and managed forests, and I mean, it made the difference. So 800 cubic meters and all the canopies. So if you look with thermal camera from above the old-growth forest and in the vicinity, you look at the, let's say, managed forest with the same thermal camera, you would see it's really cold. It's cold because it takes so much energy, the old-growth forest. And I could talk about high diversity, complex structure, also symbiotic relationships, and so on. Also carbon storage capacity, especially the stability of old-growth forest, very large trees, the longevity is very high of those trees in, let's say, temperate European ecosystems. But I have to add something. Old-growth forests are not indestructible. So the solution to the environmental crisis that we are facing is not to convert all forest towards primary forest. This will not be a solution. So we really need to tackle the environmental crisis that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juraj, also for highlighting that that the old growth, that this is not the only solution. And of course, also in many European countries, there are no old growth forests left. So we need to kind of work with what is there. I have some questions in the chat that are all very good, and I'm happy to address them. However, I would still like to continue a little bit based on the first inputs in the group, because I would like to learn a little bit about best practices from different projects. And I would like to start with Serena, because you've worked with live projects and they're quite hands-on and also have a little bit of a research component. So it's a combination. Are there any best practices that you could share? I know you focused on the Mediterranean region, but is there anything that you can say for the Mediterranean region and even go beyond that?
Yeah, so first of all, I would like to say that with our project, the previous project, Live GoPro 4, one of the main action of the project was actually really analyzing a bunch of live projects all around, which were carried out all around Europe, to actually collect good practices from forest-based, actually good practices from all these projects, and to make a unique database where all these good practices are available, can be available. So actually, there is a database with now it's like we have 270 good practices that are available for anyone who is interested to see them. And so for each practice, actually, the collection system was analyzing the activity that was done in the project, analyzed and described the activity, starting from the methodology used and the processes, even the tool needed to replicate it, so that one can really replicate the good practice that he's interested to. If I think to one example of one good practice, I actually think to the good practice that we are actually using in our actual project, which concerned the implementation of islands of senescence, which are actually like patches of forests inside at a forest complex, for example, scale. We define some forest patches where we actually where the main function is biodiversity conservation. So we integrate biodiversity conservation in the forest complex by delimiting some patches where we actually do specific interventions to foster biodiversity, while in the rest of the forest area we promote, for example, continuous forest cover, forestry, sorry, and where so we have more productive function. So, for example, in this database, there is all there is the description of this good practice. So, how to make islands of senescence? What are them? Which kind of interventions we can implement in these patches. This is just one of 270 examples that one can look at.
Yeah, we should definitely check out the website. One follow-up question, do you have an example for those intervention, like for instance creating standing deadwood, or just to give some inspiration to the participants?
Yeah, of course. We had to adapt a little bit the concept of islands of senescence for our project right now. So the regional one is a bit different, or the regional good practice is a bit different. But now we are implementing these different kind of interventions, such as deadwood creation, because one of the main problems in our forest is that deadwood is not existing actually, like the cultural system led to bring it away actually until the last year. So we are increasing deadwood inside these patches, and also we look at we ensure the presence of little open areas to allow the entrance, for example, of herbaceous species, flowering species, which are essential for some insects or animal species which can feed on them, for example, and other other things. For example, we pay attention to the structure, so we try to diversify also the structure, the vertical structure, and we pay attention also for the big trees, which are very important for many animal species as habitat trees, so trees with microhabitats and so on. So these are more or less the main kind of interventions that we plan in these patches of forest.
Thank you very much, Serena. And it would be a very interesting, more long-term research to see how those different patches compared to the other approaches react to, for instance, disturbances. But this is just an idea. I can see that Marcus is diligently responding to many questions in the Q&A. I'm impressed. That's great. And we will still catch up on some of those questions. But I have also more general question that we can that maybe Marcus can respond to this, but also Juraj, and then Olive can maybe tell a little bit from her practical perspective. But you mentioned the existing set of tree species, Markus, and the potential to broaden the scope here a little bit and to also integrate better adapted tree species, or tree species that we anticipate are better adapted to future conditions, which is something we can never tell for sure. So what is your opinion on that? And then maybe Juraj can add to this, and then also Olive from her perspective.
So we are always starting from the side conditions that we are facing. So there's no general recommendation that everybody should now plant Douglas fir, for example. I would not really recommend that. But if you are looking at your site conditions and you are understanding that your current species portfolio is going to be challenged by increasing drought conditions, for example, you have to look at which natural species are you actually having available in your current portfolio of management options. And then also to understand that we have already gained quite some experience with both introducing more southern provenance, but also using some introduced species also. If you want to still, I mean, as a forest owner who's really depending on the economic income from the forest enterprise, you need to look at what are the options. And I do think that enriching maybe your forest stand with one or two introduced species can really widen your options and also create more resilient, productive forests for the future.
Thank you very much. Juraj, would you like to add to this, kind of based on your experience?
Yes. So I believe we are not experimenting enough. So we need foreign ecotypes and we need to test them. We need also some of exotic species, and we have many exotic species for years in Central Europe. And so we have already some experience, but at the moment we are really facing strong opposition from nature conservation. And they don't understand that even testing is for them problematic. And we should try with testing. And if we would also start planting, we could never renew what we already have from the past centuries in Central Europe. So I believe that this opposition might be problematic, and we have to discuss this more. And I'm sure we will find the solution, but at the moment is kind of a tense situation in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Juraj. Yes, it is very controversial discussions actually happening around the topic of what to plant and whether also going for more exotic or non-native tree species. They're like very heated debates. So maybe we can do a webinar on that as well in the future. I think it's a very crucial topic, particularly for the practitioners. Which leads me to asking Olive, what are you planning for the future? Or are you kind of open to new tree species, or will you go for the more conventional approach?
For me personally, I'm very keen on experimenting. I think my background, I'm an immunologist. I trained in research, so that's where I came from. So I'm very, I think we need to just look at as broad a mix as possible. But with that then does come for owners a risk. And we need to recognize that there is that financial risk that owners are going to face by taking these, by planting broader mix. Like we have a model that is built around, very homogenized timber species. So we need owners to take more risks. We need to support them in doing that. And I think there are ways of doing that by payment for different services that isn't timber. But we also then need to see the industry take risks with regards to the type of timber, by broadening out. Marcus touched on this or just discussed this very well in his talk, and then we also need policy to reflect that, one size does not fit all, but that they need to back the people who are going to take these risks, and they need to have supports in place that if we do more experimentation, if forest owners take that on, that they will be supported despite, irrespective of whatever that outcome is. The onus shouldn't just be on the owner, because if it is just the owner and the only way that they can make money from their forest is through timber and very specific types of timber, it's not going to change, So it's about change management as much as, managing our forests. That's the way I look at it. It's about people as much as the trees. And we need to look at it. And I love Marcus's talk because it looked at the whole chain. And that's the only way that we are actually going to make resilience forests that do provide. So, there are so many benefits to forests. And the only way we can increase that is by looking at the whole chain and making sure there are, the economic aspects are catered for as much as biodiversity and climate. But the one, I suppose, kind of a question I have, and maybe for the panelists as well, is can we expect all forests to deliver on all things? Like, can we expect all forests to deliver for climate, to deliver for biodiversity, to deliver products that, for our, the housing industry, to have replace carbon, to be spaces for social? That's, is that just too much to ask for individual forests? I don't know. I'd love to hear the other. I'm taking over your job about asking questions, but yeah, that's mine.
No, that's fine. There's also the idea that you can interact with each other, of course, and I'm happy to support that. And we're also trying to promote some of the questions from some of the participants to speakers, actually. Serena, you have a direct response to this. Please go ahead.
Yeah, because I think this is a very good point, because actually I think about the Mediterranean context, but also we can relate to other territories. Now we are facing these different kind of threats. Actually, in the Mediterranean area, we have the problem and the increasing risk of fire, of very large and intense fires. Or another threat that we are facing is the increasing of the areas at risk of desertification. For example, if we think just that in our territory now, 20% of the territory is under risk of desertification. So we have different threats that we have to face, actually. And I think if we want the integrative approach to be really effective, we should think about it. We should work with it not just at the stand level, but we should work maybe more on a broader level. So, for example, on planning on a landscape level. So I think a solution could be on working in defining strategic areas at a landscape scale where we can prioritize some determined functions. So, for example, for forest fires, of course, we will find strategic areas where the fire risk is very high, and there we will prioritize intervention to reduce that risk, as well as areas with more higher ecological value where we work more to foster biodiversity. So I think I think planning is a bit of a key if we want to make this approach effective.
Thanks, Serena. Marcus also wants to add to this, and then I will read some questions from the audience, because we try to promote the participants, but they rather wanted us to read the questions, which is also fine. Please go ahead, Marcus.
I very much agree with Serena's points that the planning and managing the different expectations is really important here. So we have a lot of policy like contrasting policy expectations towards the forest, and it's really always very difficult or even impossible to provide all the services that are expected from our forest from the same location. So you need to adopt this planning approach to actually understand where you have the trade-offs and how you can actually optimize your outputs from the forest. But still, I think the topic that we are discussing generally today, this how to enhance resilience, that's kind of independent from these different demands, because for all the services we need to have resilient forests, and that's why I think it's important that we recognize how we can increase the forest resilience in the ecosystem, but also how we can make our depending systems more resilient, as I tried to explain in my presentation in the beginning.
Thank you very much, Markus. I would like to also come back to the economic issue. Obviously, there's a comment from more a comment than a question from a participant who says the idea is clear, but more mixed forest, uneven forest, biodiversity rich forest, and continuously adapting the forest is a challenge. And at the moment, mainly forest owners pay for this. So what are your suggestions to kind of maybe also change the system in a way that forest owners get more support for this, for these adaptation measures? Not sure who wants to start.
I can start on that. I think there's I think there's several different ways that we can look at that, you know, through policy, through ecosystem service payments, which I know is on the table, carbon, even though I have to say I find it's so muddy at the moment, carbon payments potentially, but that is something that if buildings are going to get a carbon code and there's going to be financial benefits for architects or whoever is building, you know, buildings with timber, it should then also come back to the forest owner. But I think there's also other opportunities that we need to explore, both as forest owners. I think we need to look at developing new revenues within our own forests. I think, I don't think we appreciate enough the different possibilities that are out there in developing different resources from our forests. I think the societal good also needs to be recognized, like Marcus, as you were saying, like benefits to soil, benefits to water, that also needs to be recognized, and management practices that promote that need to be supported. And so I think we're locked into a model where timber is the main economic resource in a forest, and that we need to shift that to looking at all the benefits, and that there has to be an economic return. Both public and private funding needs to come into that, but then also innovation from owners, from foresters, from the industry itself. You know, it again, going back to this whole chain approach to it, I think.
Yes, this was also, I think, the reason why we developed this Resonate project, because it goes beyond the forest management. It really has to, the resilience is also an issue for the value chain, and then even for the end user, it plays a role, although it hasn't, like, people are not yet so aware, obviously, but they will be. Marcus, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, very shortly. So I think indeed we need instruments from policy. Like in Germany, they have introduced particular subsidies to help adapt the forest management to climate change. But I also very much would like to echo what you said, Olive, that the owners also need to be proactive and see like what are the options available to actually get additional income streams. And there's so many options evolving, like carbon markets or other payments of ecosystem services that are increasingly coming up as options to have alternatives. But still, most owners will need to have a productive forest resource to also then sell their wood and the different products that they are able to produce. And for that, yeah, we need to support this transition, but we also have to understand that there are certain factors, like, for example, the game density, that you can influence partly yourself, or you have to collaborate with the hunters, because if you have a sustainable level of game, then you actually have a lot more natural regeneration and a lot more options to manage with.
Thank you, Marcus. Yeah, thank you also for mentioning the game pressure, also when it comes to natural regeneration. Also, I think a topic for another webinar, because that's also something that we are struggling with when restoring forests, obviously. We've promoted Antoine and Cesai as speakers, so they can ask their questions live. Maybe, Antoine, you want to start? It's a France-related question, but I think it's still relevant because it links to what people tell and then what research responds. Are you able to ask your question live, Antoine?
Do you hear me, guys?
Yes, we do.
Okay, super cool. No, I know some faces here because I'm from Port-Silva, France. No, I was just thinking about this general idea in France. The general trend in this from the forest wood sector is to say basically that the local species are dying and that we need to replace them in a pretty short range regarding forest timeline, like in the 50 next years, knowing that the fact that the climate change effects will be even more important in order to adapt the forests. And I just wanted to have the opinion of some of the panelists here. Marcus.
Maybe I can start. I would really not want to support this idea that all the native trees are dying. I think in most places in Europe, we are still seeing that our forests are resilient, and that the majority of species is not necessarily going to be disappearing in the next 50 years. But we do need to see that there is a risk that on particular sites there is problems for several species, and this will have to be addressed, of course. But I would really not want to advocate that we now have to completely replace our current range of species with new introduced species, but rather looking at how to increase diversity of species, how to add some species to the mix, how to also maybe manage the native forest composition on one side, but then maybe have another side with an experiment to then introduce some different species. This way you can really learn from how the different forests will react to the changes. And then I think with time we will learn how to really integrate all these options into our future management, but not really replacing everything with something not tested for the future.
Thank you very much. If there's no further response to this, I would like to ask Cesai to speak, and this question is more related to primary forests, and I guess to Juraj. I think you're struggling with the headphones, so I will read it for you anyways, in case you cannot speak. The question is, I think, mainly for Juraj, and Cesai is elaborating that primary forests have a critical role to play in sequestration of carbon, and also, as you mentioned, a high potential for building resilience. And he asked you to explain why scaling up to primary forests is not a solution. I guess it links to the availability of primary forests, but I'm curious to hear more.
I mean, we have such a small percentage of old growth forests in Europe that for sure we have to scale up. So let's say a few percentages is for sure would be a very good way forward. But on the other hand, Europe has very large ecological footprint. So we use a lot of wood resources. And on one hand side, this is good, but on the other hand side, this puts enormous pressure on other countries outside Europe. and we have to be very aware of this. It's called leakage, and we have to focus more on local markets, I believe. And if I may add one example from, let's say, more gardening or this local production of food, there is a really society developing, discussing, and people are producing in their free time a lot of wood. And I believe in the past times, we would also use a lot of wood locally. But now we have this huge transportation distances, we have external costs because of this that nobody is calculating, because of pollution, because of CO2 emissions and so on. So I believe we have perhaps also to decrease the consumption of wood or decrease consumption of everything, of natural resources. This would be a solution. But we are driving with larger and larger, heavier and heavier cars and so on and so on. So I believe the forest cannot, in a way, be solve the problems that we have with the environment. Forest has to adapt. So this is what we have to do. And on the other hand, with kind of local production of goods, of renewable resources, we could, in a way, add to sustainable society. So that's why I don't believe that we need perhaps, I don't know, 20% of all growth forests and so on. We have to rely on kind of traditional sustainable production in our managed forests, especially close to nature forests in Europe. We have very nice tradition of this, and this is perhaps important task, and we have to discuss about this more and more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jure, also for mentioning that the forest will not solve all our problems, unfortunately, although it is, of course, one of the important contributing to the solutions. But it can't solve it all because there are also other very important factors. We have another question from the audience, and then I would like to wrap it up. The question is coming from Davide Vecchio.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is, what's, in your opinion, the best kind of forest management system to provide a higher biodiversity and increase the forest resilience to natural disturbances? So is it better a high forest system, coppice system, or rather a mixed one? And in coppice system also there's many different coppice system, like standard release reserves and simple coppice. So what do you think could be most relevant for biodiversity and for forest resilience?
Integrated forest management. But I let Markus respond. I can see him already starting, and maybe also the others would like to add.
I think I stressed quite a number of times that this is not something that you can answer in a general answer, because this is really very much depending on your local condition. If your local biodiversity is depending on a coppice per standard management regime, and the local biodiversity is declining because that system is no longer practiced, then this is the way that you can actually restore that type of biodiversity. But having like a more resilient and more biodiverse system can be implemented in many different ways. I would like to just like also maybe have a short reflection on the previous question and answer from Juri. I agree that we can definitely afford to increase our area of secondary, primary, like a secondary old growth forest, because we do have a space to actually increase from below 3% to some more. But if you are only targeting like development of primary forests as the only way forward, I think you are going to have enormous trade-offs, because you need to set aside large areas from any kind of management. And I think the integrative management network, integrated forest management network, is exactly trying to also show that there's other ways how you can actually improve your biodiversity impacts by having habitat trees and special habitats in your managed areas, which are then complementing the larger reserves in the primary forest. So it's not the one solution that fits everywhere, but it's the smart combination of different management approaches at different sites, which will yield the highest positive impacts on biodiversity protection.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Yeah, also for highlighting that this is also site-specific, and that we always have to look at the local ecosystem and the conditions and the specific needs. It would be so nice to have this kind of overall answer, but yeah, we don't have it. Before we wrap it up, I still have one final question from the perspective of a research organization and from the perspective also of the Transform It project. So the question goes to the more of the practitioners here in this call, but maybe the others can also add. What do you think from your practitioner's perspective can research do better to support you to improve the resilience of your forest? What would you need? Maybe we can start with Olive.
That's a very tricky question. I know what I want, and that is clear facts, do's, don'ts. But then I also know from a scientific background that scientific research will never deal in absolutes. You know, there's always caveats, always that. So that's the conundrum between research, translating research out, because people just want to know A, B, C, and that's it. But research can never do that. So I think, as Yuri said, it is about more experimentation and trying to engage people in that. And I think creating security around minimizing the risks of experimentation for the forest owner by providing, other supports there, so that more people might be willing to engage in that. And one thing, and I noticed it in the questions as well, and it's about the economics, particularly of the economics of moving from a clear fell system that has a very obvious market output to an integrated management approach, particularly then with lots of mixed species that you might necessarily have the same market. And looking at the economics, I think that's probably one of the biggest pieces of research that I personally would like to see, so that we can actually say, okay, this is the financial return from this. This is the financial return from doing it this way. But monoculture, it's a very, very risky asset. If you look at it as an owner, it's your asset. It's very susceptible to disease, to climate change. This way, your asset is more secure. Your return might be less or spread out in different ways, but at least deal in those facts. I think at the moment, I haven't seen a piece of research that really has given good breakdown of returns on that we can compare, because that is the bottom line for a forest owner, is the return. As we're not philanthropists. This is the source of income. It supports family, it supports the rural economy. It's such an important part of forest resilience, is that it is economically resilient. So for me, for research, that is an area that I'd love to see more done on. But apart from that, yeah, I think it's clear information. I think Marcus's talk was amazing at kind of breaking things down. But I understand that kind of the absolute clear steps that I look for, it's not possible from research. But yeah.
Thanks, Olive. Before I hand over to Serena, there is a comment in the chat from the participant, from Helle, who is actually investigating this financial data that you're looking for. So that I think is worth checking out. Thank you very much, Helle, for the inspiration. And now hand over to Serena.
Yeah, thank you. I think from my experience working in the context of live projects and working actually a lot with training on these kind of aspects, I noticed that we actually, in the LIFE project, we take data from the research field, and then we transform them to make them tools usable for practitioners during their year in their forest management. And what I noticed is that the use of indicators is very useful for practitioners, because for example, we use a lot an index which was developed by National Center for Forests in France, which is called the IBP, which is an index to evaluate the potential biodiversity of the actual forest. And it is a very easy tool, for example, to use for a practitioner, and it's not really time demanding. So it's an easy way to assess the forest conditions, and also to guide the forest management. So I really noticed that the use of this kind of indicator that for sure they have to be developed from the research field, but they are very, very useful, because practitioners are more willing to adopt defined measures if they have a tool that guide them. So a tool that say, yes, do it, no, don't do that. And I think that work. There are good opportunities on that field. I also think there are a lot of information about the forests in Central Europe, for example. But I think in the Mediterranean context, there is still a lot to do about that, about finding new indicators which help for the integrative approach.
Thank you very much, Serena, also for building a bridge for any type of decision support tools and guidance, which we will certainly also produce and transform it. That's one of the plans in this project. Is there any other comment from the panel before I hand over to Georg for the final conclusions? No. Okay. Then I would like to, from my side, thank you all very much for the discussion. I've learned a lot, although I've already been working on these topics for several years. It's always interesting to get the new perspectives. Also learned a lot from the forest owner perspective. Thank you very much for that. Yeah, of course, from the work with old growth forest, and then also Serena, you have quite an overview of projects now, and I think this is also interesting for the participants. And yeah, Markus, thanks for the excellent presentation. Also, thank you very much to the participants for your very good questions. I'm sorry we didn't manage to answer them all, but I think most of them were answered. That was a very engaging discussion, including with the participants. And now I would like to hand over to Georg.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes,
okay.
We can.
Thank you very much. So I think it's impossible to summarize all the aspects of the discussion to a summary. I think it was very important to learn that when we talk about resilience of forests, we should not only see the forests themselves, but also the surrounding people, industry, forestry itself, and people that live from forests. And they should also, and the whole society, which is depending from forests, should be to some extent resilient. This is what I learned, not only to look at the forests themselves. There were even more questions came up in the discussions. And I think this is what we really should try to answer together in the Integrate project, practitioners, scientists, and also the decision makers who are part of the whole network. And in this I would like to thank all the speakers, specifically Markus Lindner, who interrupted his holidays for this presentation, but also all the participants in the meeting and all, specifically the colleagues from the European Forest Institute who organized and did all the work for the preparation of the meeting. Thank you very much.